All right, Jesse. We like to talk about each month the books I read the last month. Longtime listeners know my goal is to read 5 books per month. So we're in February now, so we will talk about the 5 books I read in January 2023. The first one was called Sitting by the Mini Bay, My Life in Building Model Docks by Dwayne Johnson. So that was a surprising twist, a surprising turn by him. It has over 50 pages of photos. He's shirtless in most of them. Interesting. He builds his mock docks shirtless. So there you go. Now, what did I read? All right, let's go through this quickly. Book number 1, 1,000 Brains by Jeff Hawkins. So this is a new theory about how the cortex helps create human consciousness and intelligence. Jeff Hawkins is a former tech executive who put all of his fortune into trying to figure out how the brain works and then build intelligent machines using this research. This is his latest book with his latest findings. If ever there's like Reese Terminator style character who comes back from the future to prevent Skynet from going online, he's probably gonna be looking for Jeff Hawkins. Let's be honest about that. All right. I also read The 90s by Chuck Klaustermann. So Klaustermann writes these books where, I don't know if you've ever seen a Klaustermann book, but he's been doing these more recently. Like The 90s is just looking at the 90s, and it's just all these different smart cultural critiques about different aspects of the 90s, which is when you and I were kids. It was good. Yeah. I've heard it was really good on tape. I read the physical version. I enjoyed it. I mean, it helps that I grew up then, but actually I might lend it to you. I think you would like it.
Any examples?
I mean, I think the music stuff is interesting.
Yeah.
Like he gets really deep on really what was happening behind the scenes with grunge and these musicians and the whole selling out culture that Gen X had created and how that clashed against the commercial imperatives of music. It's actually learned a lot about like Kurt Cobain, for example. Interesting. It doesn't make me think of, I don't look back after I read this book and say, man, I wish I could go back to the 90s. It's an interesting time and it's interesting to think about, but it doesn't make me want to go back. But you know what I found out? You remember the 70s show? So when we were growing up in the 90s, there's a show called The 70s Show, which was a sitcom about life in the 70s.
Yeah.
Well, now we're 20 or 30 years out of the 90s. They're doing a new show called The 90s Show.
Yeah.
Because when we were growing up in the 90s, the 70s was as far from us as the 90s are far from people who are kids today. So our childhood is now going to be the target of the nostalgic retrospective show.
It was a good time to be a New York Yankee fan if you were.
Yeah, late 90s. Yeah. All right. Then I read quite a good thriller, actually. Robin Cook's very first thriller, Coma, from the 1970s. Straight up one of the first medical thrillers. So him and Crichton were both working on this, but Cook was, I believe he got to the punch first. And it's, it's creepy as hell. Like in the end, there's coma patients. They're being put into comas surreptitiously so they could harvest their organs. Not the spoiler alert. Really well written. The interesting thing about it, unlike some modern thrillers, is it's, I don't know, the last third before you get to any actual, I am being chased. Like the first 2/3 of the book is really this new resident sort of starting to unravel the conspiracy and doing investigations. And the main stakes are, her supervisors at the hospital are mad at her, or that if she's not at round, she might get in trouble. So and yet it still works. Nowadays, a modern thriller, it's, the second page, the shark is being shot at you from the cannon and you have to kill it with a laser sword. It gets right into it. So different time, but great book.
When you read thrillers, you breeze through
them? I'm not a fast reader. My wife is a fast reader. When she reads novels, she's like, because I read a lot of nonfiction and write a lot of nonfiction, it's hard for me to speed up. So I'm the guy reading that's thinking, okay, well, interesting. They referenced the computer mainframe in chapter 2, and they noted that it was using hexadecimal, and now we're in chapter 4, and I'm wondering, I'm reading these thrillers like I'm studying Proust, which is probably not the fastest way to do it.
When you say you're not fast, are you really fast?
I don't read these books very fast. I'm not a speed reader, I'm not even like a fast reader. I go too slow because my mind always wants to understand everything and fit everything into what Jeff Hawkins at 1,000 Brains would call reference frames. My brain, that book helped me understand my own brain. I have like an overactive reference frame system. Everything I encounter has to be fit into these frames, and I'm incredibly unhappy till it is. So I can't read things fast. I can't have loose ends. I need to, okay, here's this person, here's the building, here's the rooms in the building. Like, it's very useful when it comes time to solve math proofs or write things, but I can't, I'm just physically uncomfortable if it doesn't bother my wife at all. If she's like, oh, I don't remember if like, oh, who is this guy? Was he dead? Or, I'm like, no, I need to know like exactly his, like, who did he connect to? How is this house laid out? So I can't read fast. I mean, you're right. Maybe it's fast compared to, depends on the relative.
One more quick question about this. When you read a 10-page New Yorker article, how long does that usually take you?
A while. If I read like a standard, because, I always try to read at least one article from the magazine each week when it comes out.
Half an hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I'll read it in the morning sometimes for the kids get up, and it will take the whole time.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll have to come back to it. Yeah. Because I'm like but I'll come away and be able to tell you everything that happened in that New Yorker article, some of the stylistic choices of the author, and I pulled out like 2 second order theories that we could potentially talk about on the show. So it's like a very cognitively involved process for me when I'm reading. I'm a machine for turning text into connected, internally consistent theories and ideas. Like, that's what I am. I've been like bred in a lab to do that. All right, next, this is not really neither of these are really books, but I just read them back to back because one influenced the other. I read this over Martin Luther King weekend, was Thoreau's On Civil Disobedience, and then Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail. The latter, of course, inspired by and pulling from the former. So I thought it'd be interesting to read those back to back. MLK's, I think, is much better than Thoreau's. I mean, I get Thoreau's at the time. Obviously it was an innovative thought. Gandhi pulled from it. MLK pulled from it. But it doesn't age as well. Mm-hmm. And in part because he created a world that's been more normalized, so it doesn't seem as retroactive. But it's, I'm not going to pay my tax until my friend comes like 3 hours later and pays for me to get out of my small jail in the town where I'm related to everybody. It just feels very different. And MLK, as a rhetorician, is so good. Just his ability to make an argument and to inject a sort of humanity into it, yet it's still just rock solid. This clicks to this sort of inevitable logic with emotion. I mean, just absolute once in a century type ability. So you read these back to back, and Thoreau, I mean, I love Thoreau. Thoreau's very influential to me, but you see the person who's really throwing the 105-mile-per-hour fastballs MLK there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not Thoreau. And then the last was, I don't know how many people are going to follow me up on this recommendation. The Feynman Lectures on Computation. It was a book form collection of a series of lectures that Richard Feynman gave at Caltech about computation. And I've pulled from it before for various classes I taught, but I read that right at the beginning of January because I didn't teach last semester. I was on leave. And then before that was summer. So I hadn't been in a classroom since May 2020. And I wanted to get back in the mood. So I was like, all right, I'm going to read Feynman's lectures on computation just to get back in the computer sciencey pedagogical. Feynman's a physicist, not a computer scientist. And he comes at these things like with really originality and new takes. And I just thought it would put me back in the mood of, hey, let's explain things to people in useful ways. It was pretty good. I would say like 50% of the stuff I really loved reading about. 20%, I know it so well. I teach it and the field's advanced since Feynman wrote it. I'm like, this is like a worse version of it. And then the other whatever percent is left was really just physics stuff I didn't care about. I was like, oh, God. The stupid reversible circuit stuff. It's like, I don't need to hear any more about reversible circuits. But like his information theory and coding theory chapter is fantastic. So there you go. I don't know how many people will take me up on that last recommendation, but the Feynman Lectures on Computation doesn't move as fast as Coma by Robin Cook. It's not the similar genre, but I enjoyed it.